modestly called her vegetable compound the greatest medical discovery since the dawn of history. And it was soon followed by dozens of imitators. The purpose of these remedies was to treat all those wasting disorders peculiar to the female sex. The need was never felt to point out that most of these products contain the same amount of alcohol as 80-proof sour mash bourbon. Think thin was a slogan for another century, and Grove's tasteless chill tonic could apparently do wonders for the lean and lank. But it's hard to believe that their tonic could have been as tasteless as their ad. When the first successful electric light bulb popped on in Tom Edison's New Jersey laboratory, it also seemed to go on in the heads of 1 million American ad men. Electricity can do anything, they seem to reason, so let's use it to cure the ills of mankind and maybe make a couple of bucks besides. Electricity is life, the ads were soon reading. The friend of humanity. The electric flesh brush is a sure cure for sleepless nights, softening of the brain, paralysis, sudden death, and baldness. The electric belt, without doubt, could make a man strong and virile and bold. After all, it cured brain fag. And for many women, vigorous health and a graceful figure would come from wearing an electric corset. Of course it would. One can only speculate on what occurred when our electrified ancestors got together, but it must have been shocking. The good old Edison electric garter probably sparked many a romance, and if you happen to read Edison for Edson, well, so much the better. And then, of course, there was your basic electric soap, your electric rat and roach paste, the good old electric towel, and those visionary electric eyeglasses, which must have generated quite a spectacle. It wasn't until well after the turn of the century, 1906, that Congress finally pulled the plug on this kind of advertising with the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act. But even that couldn't dim the energies of America's high-voltage advertising men, and electricity and advertising seemed to be made for each other. Poor P.T. Barnum was born just a bit too soon to get into the era of electrical advertising, but his Broadway museum in the 1850s pierced the New York night with 1,000 gaslights. It gave Manhattan a preview of what would become the Great White Way. The great boom in outdoor advertising, along with many other changes in American lifestyle, came about as a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. great steam engines, electric lights and motors, instant communications, rapid transportation, and ingenious mechanical devices were combining to give American industry an unprecedented capability for the manufacture of goods. Up to a point, that was good news. By about 1900, however, American industry found itself producing more goods than could be sold. In the early years of the new century, there were over 1,000 different makes of automobiles being manufactured. The situation with cigars at the turn of the century was even more confusing. According to one report, there were an astounding 350,000 registered brands of cigars for sale as the 19th century came to an end. Thank you, my man. Fortunately, a few of those brands were quite acceptable. They may have been a good reason for all those brands. As Rudyard Kipling pointed out, a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke. Hear, hear. Many other manufactured goods were also flooding the marketplace in staggering numbers. The captains of industry, in order to find new buyers for all these goods, turned to the captains of advertising. The large advertising agencies, many of which still exist today, began coming into their own. The advertising campaigns they created did indeed generate new markets, and they also caused the weeding out of the less successful products. By 1925, for example, those more than 1,000 automobile makers had been reduced to 15. A year later, President Calvin Coolidge would attribute much of America's prosperity to advertising. The preeminence of American industry, said the president, has come very largely through mass production. Mass production is only possible where there is mass demand. Mass demand has been created almost entirely through advertising. One of the ways advertising helped companies prosper was through the widespread display of distinctive trademarks. The first trademark to be used in a major advertising campaign belonged to the Smith Brothers Cough Drop Company. In 1886, William and Andrew Smith got the bright idea of using line drawings of themselves as their trademark. Under the drawing of Bill went the word trade, and under Andy's picture went the word Mark. In a running gag that lasted a century, the boys were known as Trade and Mark Smith. They also had another idea, one that would change the face of merchandising around the world. For years, the boys were coughing up a lot of bucks to have their drops sold from large bottles in drugstores, bottles which prominently displayed their distinctive trademark. Since they were apparently the best cough drops around, druggists sold them for more than other brands, and they had to pay more for them, too. It wasn't long before many druggists were filling the jars with cheaper drops, but still selling them at the Smith Brothers prices. The hell with that, said Trade and Mark, and putting their lithographed heads together, they came up with the idea of putting their cough drops into boxes at the factory. It was one of those brilliantly simple ideas that no one had ever thought of before, packaging consumer goods at the factory. Before long, everybody was doing it, and advertising had another challenge. With Haskell's Wheat Flakes sitting on the shelf right next to Pettijohn's California breakfast food, the package had to sell the product. The answer came with appealing slogans, distinctive designs, logos they're called now, which would make a buyer feel that the product inside the box was an old trusted friend. And speaking of slogans, we now come to that age-old question, why is the Alamo like Elsie the cow? The answer is, of course, that they both have the same father, in a manner of speaking. A rather remarkable Texan named Gail Borden started the state's first real newspaper and then became one of the writers of the Texas Constitution. In 1836, Borden first printed the new Constitution in his paper just a few days after the fall of the Alamo. At the bottom of the page, in large letters, he added the most stirring slogan in American history, "Remember the Alamo."